Good morning, y'all. Welcome to today's episode of the Focus Daily Show. First of all, I want to begin this show by giving all praise due to the Most High and His Son, Jesus Christ. It is through them I am being sent to give this truth of true American history as a chance for grace and redemption. All right, today we're going to talk about slavery being outlawed. By this slavery, I mean physical slavery. So when this group of Confederates arrived on the shores of America, yeah, slavery was a part of that. But it quickly came to an end once the powers that be realized that slavery was an insufficient form of disenfranchisement. They were looking for bigger fish to fry. They were looking for a grander opportunity. So they began to put an end to this slave trade, this physical slave trade. So today we're going to look at a couple of documents. All right, right here we got what's known as the Slave Trade Act of 1794. Now, like I said, when you're dealing with American history, you have to put on your discernment because it's all written in the code, it's all written backwards, and the truth is within it, but is hidden only for those with certain keys to be able to unlock it. And during this time and day that we are living in, it is our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, that has the keys to unlock this seal. All right. So the long title of this act, this Slave Trade Act of 1794, was an act to prohibit the carrying on of the slave trade from the United States to any foreign place or country. Now look at that. There we go right there. It's not saying the act of bringing slaves to the United States. It's saying the act of carrying the slave trade from the United States to other countries. Because when they first got here, one of their plans to disenfranchise the land was to just remove the people. But later on, they realized that it would be better to remove the identification of the people. It'd be better to remove the birthright of the people and replace themselves within that birthright. All right, let's read on a little more. All right. The Slave Trade Act of 1794 was a law passed by the United States Congress that prohibited American ships from engaging the international slave trade. It was signed into law by President George Washington on March 22, 1794. This was the first of several anti-slavery trade acts of Congress. So, it was the United States Congress, or should I say, the British monarchy under the guise of United States Congress that ended international slave trade. And by ending this slave trade, it helped empower the Articles of Confederation that had been recently ratified. It helped empower them to collect to collect regular taxes. See, by outlawing this slave trade, that gave the British monarchy the ability to search every cargo ship coming in and out of these 13 colonies that they were establishing, of this new Virginia company that they were establishing. And this slave trade outlawing this slave trade made it for they could better collect information, collect taxes, because it gave them an opportunity to search each ship and catalog their cargo. So it wasn't that they felt that enslaving people was wrong. It was that they was trying to build a better foundation for this Virginia company that they were putting together, for this Virginia experiment that was about to take place. All right. This was the first of several anti-slavery trade acts of Congress. In 1800, Congress strengthened it by sharply raising the fines and awarding informants the entire value of any ship seized, as well as additional prohibitions on American investment and employment in the trade. Federal outlawing of the importation and exportation of slaves to the United States was enacted in 1807. See, like I said, when you're dealing with this type of legalese, you have to be able to use your discernment and read in between the lines. But right here, an act to prohibit the carrying on of the slave trade from the United States to any foreign country is right there as plain as day. We're gonna look over a couple of more, one more document. All right. All right. Native American slave ownership refers to the ownership of enslaved Africans and Native Americans by Native Americans from the pre-colonial period to the U.S. Civil War. All right. All right. What I was going to get out of this? Okay. All right. Waves of European colonists and the concurrent Atlantic slave trade brought enslaved Africans to North America. Following this development, let me say something about these enslaved Africans. These enslaved Africans right here, while some may have been skin folk, you're speaking a wide variety of races. This wasn't about black and white at this point. This was about bringing in the necessary forces to enact this Virginia company that they was bringing in life. So when it says enslaved Africans, that can include European, that can include the Dutch, that can include anyone from that Eastern world. So they was bringing colonists over here from the Eastern world and labeling them as enslaved Africans. But as we move forward through this series, you'll be able to see that. Following this development, many indigenous tribes began to acquire Africans as slaves. Many prominent people from the 5 civilized tribes purchased slaves from their white neighbors. So, the indigenous people began to purchase chattel slavery, or servants, or people to work the land, but it wasn't necessarily black man. It was the whole spectrum. And as they brought them over here, they introduced them into the indigenous culture and to the indigenous society by selling them as slaves, selling them as servants. And while being servants and slaves, they learned to fit in and assimilate into what the indigenous people of America had going on. All right. Many prominent people from the 5 civilized tribes purchased slaves from their white neighbors and became members of the planter class. You know, while money wasn't the indigenous people's main goal in life, once these foreigners or Confederates begin to infiltrate their land and their cultures, they put this greed in them. They put this lust for money, riches and possessions within these 5 civilized tribes. And they told them that if they participated in the activities that the Confederates were introducing, that they could themselves live on the high horse. That's just the best way I can put it. Because little did they know, they was living the best life possible. But let's keep going. And became members of the planter class. All slaves in the United States were emancipated by the 13th Amendment. All right, we haven't got that yet. All right, let's get into a background. Holding humans in slavery was not a new concept to the indigenous American people. In inter-Native American conflicts, tribes often kept prisoners of war, and these captives often replaced slain tribe members. See, this is just a short, real quick peep glance into this new system that they were introducing. It was a system of replacing the indigenous people with the foreign nation or the Confederates and claiming their name, claiming their birthright, allowing them to claim their land and their riches and anything connected with that name. All right. Intra-Indigenous slavery also occurred in the Pacific Northwest and in Alaska, where it persisted until the 19th century. Native American versions of slavery prior to European contact sometimes differed from European concepts of slavery, in that Native Americans did not originally distinguish between people based on skin color, but rather traditions. So there we go. It wasn't about your race. It was about being introduced and assimilated into the indigenous people culture. But in order to do that, you might have had to work amongst the native indigenous people of North America. You might have had to sell yourself as a servant or a chattel slave in order to better assimilate into this culture. African Americans and Native Americans have interacted for centuries. The earliest record of Native American and African contact occurred in April 1502 when Spaniard colonists transported the first African to Hispaniola to be held and work in slavery. Some scholars argue that because of the similarities between some of the Africans and Native American cultural artifacts, the two groups likely had transatlantic encounters before the Europeans of America. See, right here is pointing out that African Americans and Native Americans were so-called African Americans and Native Americans were so identical in cultural aspects that the two groups was practically practiced the same culture. But then it also says this cannot be proved. But that's where your discernment comes in. Let's keep on moving. By the 18th century, Africans held captive in slavery by and with Native Americans became a commonplace in America. See, now go to deception. They was with each other, or were they the same group? And that's just one question. I'm just asking that question. I'm gonna let you fill in the blank and add your own discernment. Native Americans and Africans had many interactions as parallel oppressed communities. Before the jump start of the Atlantic slave trade, European slave settlers enslaved many Native Americans. There you go, right there. When they first arrived, they began taking us away. Themselves into our place. But the slavery didn't give them the legal foothold that they needed as a foundation. So they began to incorporate more sinister methods that'll be discussed later. All right. European settlers enslaved many Native Americans, and major Europeans held colonies such as Virginia, the Virginia Company, there you go, and South Carolina, enslaved 30 to 53,000 of Native Americans or in the indigenous children of America in the late 1600s and through the 1700s, with the occurrence of enslavement continuing until the early 1800s. All right, one more section and this is it. Andres Resendez estimated that between 147,000 and 340,000 indigenous children of America or Native Americans were enslaved in North America, including Africa. Okay, so there we go. We were indeed part of that slave trade, But we didn't come over here from no Africa. We was already here. And when they got here, when they seen a piece of land or property that interests them, they simply removed the people and placed them in other locations. Sometimes they went as far as to put them on boats, sail off the coast, and arrive at another location as if they were arriving from Africa. All right. Native Americans during this transitional period of Africans becoming the primary enslaved race. You see how they did the switch? There you go, right there. That's how you. That is the beginning stages of going from Native Indigenous Americans to Africans. Okay, let's back it up. Native Americans during this transitional period of Africans becoming the primary race enslaved were enslaved at the same time and shared a common experience of enslavement. They worked together. They lived together in communal quarters, produced collective recipes for food, shared herbal remedies, myths, and legends, and in the end, they intermarried. So these so-called African Americans and these indigenous children of America was so similar that they shared food recipes. They ate the same food. They had the same herbal remedies. They had the same myths and legends, and they even went so far as to intermarriage with each other. But what we were actually witnessing is how the indigenous children of America began to be labeled as African through deceptive slave trades and maritime activities, I should say. So, at this point, Britain begins to officially outlaw slavery. However, France and Spain did not want to honor this law. They continued to enslave and traffic indigenous people, all the while using islands off the East Coast, as secret hubs for underground slavery and trafficking activities. The law didn't become official till 1794, but this Slave Act of 1794 made international trafficking against the Virginia Company policy. Like I said, not for good reasons, because they had more nefarious methods of disenfranchising on the horizon. All right. Once again, that's another episode of Focus Daily.